Welcome to the video, Path to Competence. When we're attempting to learn any new skill, model, or concept, we'll find ourselves on a pretty predictable path, a learning cycle. And it can be useful to know there's a path as we're learning so we can diagnose where we are in the process and identify what we need to do to be more effective moving forward. It can start at not knowing how to do it, even if we think it'll be easy to do, then realizing how hard it might be to learn, much less to do effectively. Going through just practice and incremental progress to finally, without thinking about it, we realized, we're doing it effectively. It's become a habit, at least most of the time. It's kind of like learning to ride a bike. Maybe you saw someone riding a bike or someone took you on a bike ride and you're like, how hard can that be? And it's like, I want to do it. And so you tell some people you want to do it, but maybe you're still, 3 or 4 years old and say, they say, start with a tricycle for a while. All right. So you do that and you learn how to use the handles a bit and you don't fall off as much. You're like, okay, I'm doing good. But then you see somebody else, maybe an older sibling pedaling a bike. And you're like, I want to do that. They're like, you're not quite ready. So they give you one of these bikes or they borrow one from a neighbor where it doesn't have pedals and you just kind of push yourself along with your feet. And so you get a little more about balance, you get a little more confidence and as you go a little faster. And someone says, well, you need training wheels. No, I don't need training wheels. Let me just keep doing this for a while. So you're like, all right. But then when no one's looking, you realize an older sibling or an older neighbor is actually riding a bike with pedals and their feet are moving. So you're like, I'm going to do that. So nobody's looking, you grab their bike and you jump on it and you take off and you don't realize what you don't know and you fall over and you skin your knee, bruise your shoulders. Me, I'd be crying and then get angry and judge them for leaving that stupid bike out. And why didn't somebody teach me? Or how come I'm so clumsy and athletic? I'm such a baby. And you realize, all right, I'm willing to try with training wheels because I want to learn how to ride the bike with pedals. And so you're like, fine. You get on the bike with training wheels and you think that's maybe the one on the bottom of this link that you're seeing, the slide. That one holds you really steady to start off with. But then you're like, I saw somebody ride with just baby training wheels. I want to try that. You get on, you realize it's not quite as easy. It's a little more wobbly. Maybe you're nervous you're going to fall again. And you move side to side, back and forth as you're getting forward, you're pedaling. So you're getting the handlebars and the pedaling and the turning down, maybe a little more confidence keeping your own balance. But it's still hard. But with practice, with courage, you're like, okay, I think I'm ready to try it without the training wheels. But you remember what happened last time. And so you're like, will somebody help me? And so whether it's an older sibling or maybe an adult, you're like, can you hold the back of the bike while I try to ride by myself for the first time without training wheels? And so they're jogging along with you and you might lean over to the left like you're going to fall, but they pull you back up, or maybe they can't quite catch you fall, but you're getting stronger and clearer each time what you need to do. And every time you fall, you learn and you're like, okay, I can do this. And at some point, I remember so clearly my dad holding onto my bike in the back. And I was pedaling and riding, and I was upright, pretty balanced, and I was going. And all I said, Dad, this is cool. Dad. And he wasn't anywhere to be found. He had let me go. And at that moment, I think I kind of freaked out and still fell over and crashed, but I knew I could do it on my own. And so you try again on your own, and you're like, I can do this, but you have to be really focused. You have to think about everything you're doing and keep your balance. Hold on to those handlebars, and you're riding alone for your first time without anybody riding behind you. Full concentration, but you're doing it. And with time and practice and repetition, one day you realize you're riding and you're not thinking about it. You're looking out at the beautiful mountains, the water. You're staying on track. You're not falling over. And you have such freedom and a sense of accomplishment. Now, sometimes people learn a skill and they're like, I want to go to the next level. And so they might try all kinds of tricks and mountain biking and all kinds of things. But then all of a sudden, you didn't see it. It was a pothole or a stretch of mud, and you try to swerve at the last minute, but you fall off balance and you fall over. And you judge yourself for not paying attention, the city for not fixing the roads, the rain for falling so much, but you still get back on because you know you can push the limits, you can keep learning and growing and try again. So even once we've reached a level of competence in a skill, there may be more challenges that we haven't seen before or more difficulties or traps that pop up. It's about lifelong learning of increasing our capacity and competence. Now, I remember, Tom, I didn't ride much. When we were living in New York City, I actually tried riding on the streets, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that again. So it was several years, and we moved here to Denver, Colorado, got a bike, and I was a little wobbly at first. I mean, I'd ridden over the years for decades, but I hadn't done it in a long time. So I had to almost remember and had to really focus and pay attention and then learn the streets here in our neighborhood and in Denver, how to bike here. So it's always learning and growing in different contexts. And then you get so good, you're like, let me try to help teach and support others to ride. And when they fall over, it helps when we remember, oh, I remember that. I remember I fell or it was hard to do it. And so we have patience and compassion as others try and fail. And we pick them up. As they're frustrated at how hard it is and they want to quit, we're like, let me tell you what it's like for me to ride a bike. You're so much better than me. And this is what's going to happen next if we keep going and you do this together. So if you take the metaphor of learning to ride a bike, you can apply that to learning anything. And some people have actually built it into a conceptual model. So I want to share with you, I just learned this week as I was doing research for this, Noel Birch is given a lot of credit when they were working for Gordon Training International, developed something called the Conscious and Competence Ladder, Conscious Competence Ladder. And if you do research, you'll find lots of folks have taken some of that material. Other folks have attributed it to Abraham Maslow, conscious, unconscious competence, and I'll mention that in a bit. But the stuff I'm reading recently says actually there's nothing in his writings about it. I don't know it's true, so I want to acknowledge all my sources. Apparently in the 1970s, Noel Birch did this work, and I've adapted it to have this graphic of the 4 states of competence. And you can think about it in these 4 matrices that are created by 2 different axes. And when we learn a skill, we follow, again, a rather predictable path from the upper left hand to the right, down to the right, and back to the lower left hand. And these 4 matrices are created by 4 axes. If you look at the left, you'll see the first continuum or axis is from ineffective to effective. So over time, as we're going counterclockwise around this model, we're very ineffective, still very ineffective to the 3rd box, increasingly effective to the 4th box, we're very effective. The other axis is from unaware to aware, or as Noel Birch called it, unconscious to conscious. And so in the upper left-hand corner, we're moving from we're unaware of how incompetent we are. We get to the 2nd box, we're a little more aware. In fact, we're very aware how much we don't know. So the top 2 boxes are very much about ineffective. But as we move around, we're getting more aware of either how ineffective we are. Top 2 boxes were ineffective, bottom 2 boxes were very effective, increasingly so. And as you move around, you get increasing understanding of how much you don't know. 3rd box, I know what I know. I just have to keep learning and practicing. And then the 4th box, we're unaware of how effective we are. And so that's when some people call this unconscious competence, meaning we show up effective. It's a habit, consistently, consciously competent, unconsciously competent. We just don't know it. So as I go into a little more detail about this model, the upper left-hand corner, it's unconscious incompetence. We're ineffective. When we start out, we don't know what we don't know. We may think we know how to ride a bike or drive a car, but we get in there and something happens and we realize how hard it is. We fall, we have an accident, we barely brake in time to not hit somebody. And something happens, we realize we're not good at it. At least we won't be for a while. Now, to move out of this box, we have to realize our lack of skill or incompetence and accept it, and then want to grow. And it helps if we understand why it's important to learn these skills and to still be open to the learning. It takes lots of practice, ask, receive feedback, and it can be so frustrating, this first box of unconscious competence, because you don't know what you're doing, you don't know, and it's easy to just feel so ineffective that you give up and reject the need to learn the skills, talk about these concepts, just forget it. Throw the bike down, you never come back to it. But if you keep going at it, you can move from the top left, unconscious incompetence, to, wow, I know what I don't know and I'm willing to learn. So that's conscious incompetence, or you're aware that you're really ineffective. And in early places in this box, you're still learning what you don't know and what you need to learn. And you're maybe beginning to realize how hard it's going to be. You want to do it, but you just don't know how. And you realize how incompetent you are, and that can be hard to sit with. You might be beginning to see what competence looks like, what more effective is, but you're discouraged. I may never get there. I want to give up. So to move from this box of conscious incompetence into the next one, conscious competence, have to have a desire to want to learn and develop and be willing to do the work. It helps if you have lots of models who are really much more effective and can show you how to do it, coach you how to do it, give you support and encouragement. And you have to be willing to try out new skills and know it's going to be awkward. You're going to make mistakes. You'll probably feel frustrated at your pace of growth and development or lack thereof. But you got to put your head down and practice and effort, and you'll begin to feel, I might be able to do this. I got a little better last time. I'm not that bad anymore. That's when you're just at the edge of conscious competence. So the lower right-hand box, conscious competence, you're increasingly effective. You have more skill, but you really have to focus. You have to really think about what you're doing. You're intentionally increasing your capacity, your competence. You're getting a little more confident with each time. You're still sometimes misstepping. You're still having negative impact, but you learn from what you're doing. You're seeking out feedback. You know more what to do and how to do it, but you still have to be very thoughtful, intentional, concentrate, think things through, plan ahead. You're not yet on automatic pilot. You're aware, increasingly effective, but you've got to think about it. So to move, to really get into unconscious competence, you got to stay alert at every moment, keep practicing, keep getting feedback, get increasingly challenging situations so you get the more complex skills, the nuances. And with practice, you may find occasionally you're in that lower left box of unconscious competence, that we're so good at a skill, tying your shoes. You don't even think about it. Literally yesterday, I realized I was working out and somehow I had taken my slippers off, put on my shoes, tied them. I don't remember doing it. I don't remember how I did it, but I did it. And then I was jogging on the treadmill. Unconscious competence, I'm just doing it. But let me be clear, when I'm jogging on the treadmill, I may be in conscious competence. I have to think about it. Notice that I'm not leaning to the left or right and falling off. If I go into unconsciousness, I will probably end up rolling off the back and breaking my arm or something. You're in the lower box, unconscious competence. It is second nature. It's a habit. It seems like a natural capacity. You just do it. I remember I took driver's ed, and I was so proud of myself. I knew how to drive on that automatic car, but I didn't know there was a stick shift. They didn't teach us that part. So I come home. I'm like, I want to practice to get my driver's permit. My dad says, all right, I'll take you out. And the only car we had was a VW Bug. And it was a stick shift. And I was like, oh no. So I'd gotten pretty good, maybe conscious competence around being able to drive an automatic. Though my driver's ed professor, teacher would have said that was not really true. But I was feeling that I was pretty good. I had to think about it. But you put me in something new, a VW Bug, and I was way back into conscious incompetence. I didn't know how to do it. I kept just stripping the gears. My dad was irritated. You could just feel it. It took me a lot of time and practice to get so that I could know how to shift into first and second and use the clutch and then learn how to do it on a hill while I had the brake on. It took lots of practice. And then after a few years, I was like driving along. I didn't even realize I was moving in all the different gears, and someone pulled out in front of me and I quickly just clutched, braked, moved, saved them, saved me. Unconscious competence. But I haven't driven a stick 3 or 4 years at least, and I would have to really focus on it again to learn it again, because you lose it if you don't use it. So let's take this model, the 4 states of competence, based on Noel Birch, what some folks might have said was Abraham Maslow's work, and apply it to the skills we need to create inclusive, equitable organizations. So I really want to acknowledge the work of Drs. Jack Gant and Delight Frost from LCY Cross Associates, consulting firm that I had the honor to really grow up in as an organizational development consultant. They took Abraham Maslow's conscious unconscious competence model and overlaid diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice work. And they created, on top of Maslow's work, what they call the path to competence. And I'm really indebted to them because it's been a powerful roadmap for me to diagnose where I am. Where's my current capacity and competence around issues of diversity and multicultural organizational change management? And then to figure out what I need to do to keep learning, deepen my capacity, my competence, so that I can infuse equity, inclusion, social justice into everything I do. It's also been a great roadmap to notice where other people are, because I don't know about you, I'm noticing more and more people in their privileged and marginalized identities have a lot more knowledge and information. And they're talking the talk, they have the latest terms, but their behaviors often are not very effective. True competence, according to these models, and clearly in my opinion, is about our behaviors, what we do, how we actually show up. And so this model is not about how much you know, how well you can talk things, it's what are you doing. So at any moment, we can plot ourselves on the path to competence, get honest about where we are, and clear what we need to do next. And we can analyze where others are, entire teams, entire workshop participants, entire organizations. Again, most folks will be kind of a scatter map, but there might be some general patterns of where folks are in general, as well on different types of difference. And that will infuse your understanding to help you design workshops, decide how you want to engage people in coaching, give them feedback. Now, about 10 years ago, I had a chance to do some follow-up work with Dr. Delight Frost and get some more coaching and training from her. And I realized she'd revised the model, Path to Competence, a bit. So that's the model version I'll be using. This will look very similar to what we just looked at before, except a couple things. You'll notice, though, on the left, you still have from ineffective to effective. And on the bottom, you still have you go from unaware to aware. But they have 5 elements in the path to competence here. The box of denial, which is that unconscious incompetence. You're unaware, you're ineffective. You don't know what you don't know. And people generally, if they don't stay stuck there, move across. And as they start to learn more, they might go into the box of fear, where they're more aware and effective, but often they'll slide right into the box of judgment. Now notice that's in the middle, in that you can move into the ineffectiveness of judgment, critique, guilt, shame, blame, anger at any point. And it's very common, as either in our privileged or marginalized identities, we move out of denial, we start to learn more, we start to judge ourselves, judge others, judge society, the systems, and we just swirl and stay stuck in all these emotions. And we're ineffective because we're not taking constructive action, we're not learning, we're just blaming others, blaming ourselves. But if we keep moving, either out of the box of denial or judgment, move into the next element, the box of fear. And that's where you're aware how ineffective you are. You don't know much and you know it. You have very little skill. And it takes lots of courage, practice, persistence to keep moving on the path. But if you keep moving with time, some folks never leave. They just stay stuck in fear, deer in the headlights, consuming information. I know more. And maybe saying, yeah, I know all this, thinking that's enough, but their behaviors are not aligned with the intentions of the organization, even their own values of being of service. They just talk a good game, but they're not engaging others, they're not intervening. So in the box of engagement, you are aware of dynamics of difference, you're aware of oppression, you're aware of the skills to create greater inclusion and equitableness, and you have the skills to respond. And increasingly, early in engagement, you're doing it some, and you're asking for feedback. As you get further into engagement, you're doing it much more effectively without as much thought. But mostly engagement is like driving a stick shift on a hill. You have to think about it. Where's the clutch? Where's the brake? How much do I let off? How much I put on the gas? What gear? You have to be thinking intentionally and very present. Always, what am I doing? How am I going to do it? Even planning ahead so that in a meeting, in a training, you've got very clear next steps. Now, in my experience, it takes lots of work and practice, lots more learning and studying. And then one day you might find yourself in the flow, not thinking about what you're going to do. You just react and you're in the box of competence. You're effective and you're not aware you're effective. You're not aware in that you don't have to think about what you're doing. You're like, whoo, that was good. Where'd that come from? You're reacting out of habit. You're just naturally competent. Though in my experience, for me, I have moments here, but I don't stay there long. I'm generally on many categories of difference in the box of engagement, or kind of 1 foot in competence, but a lot of leaning and engagement. And I have moments where I can move ahead. I hope that gave you a nice overview. I now want to spend a little time going over each of these 5 elements. Whether you're learning it for yourself so you can plot yourself, or you're listening a second or third time because you want to think, how can I teach this? And how can I be more present and diagnose maybe where other people are, so therefore I can change how I engage, how I train, coach, do organizational change. So in denial, again, we are unaware of the dynamics of difference. We may know there are categories of difference. You know, I'm white, you're a person of color, but we don't believe that our differences make any impact on our lives. When you're in denial, you see and treat people as people, or at least that's what you believe. We're all human beings. You are stuck at the individual level. I'm a good one. I treat everybody with politeness. I smile. I say hello. Isn't that enough? You don't realize, and you probably don't believe in privilege and marginalization. And you clearly do not recognize that you have memberships in all those privileged groups and you receive privilege. Again, you can be in denial on the areas where you're in privilege, and you might be a little bit more in judgment or fear where you're in marginalized identities. And so again, you can be different places at different times. When we're in denial, we don't recognize the common privilege marginalized dynamics. We don't see the microaggressions. We don't see how they're fueled by bias. And we clearly don't admit that we have bias, much less that it's fueling our ineffective, unproductive behaviors, because we don't have any. If I do something you're not happy with, it's because you're too sensitive. It's because you're overreacting. It's because you didn't teach me or train me, and I slip into the box of judgment, right? And clearly, we do not see practices, policies, programs that are just infused with privileged bias, the privileged dominant culture, the values and beliefs of folks in privileged groups that just get infused into everything in an organization. It's just how things are, and it actually works for us. Or you can believe in denial that you're not good enough because you bought into the dominant narrative that your marginalized group is deficient and defective. And so many of our behaviors are perpetuating the status quo, and we're having negative impact on others. Now, if we're challenged, I'll go to that top bullet on the right, we do react out of defensiveness and fragility. You're wrong. I'm a good person. We resist feedback. We may shut down if we get too much feedback or if we're a little too uncomfortable. And at this stage, any discomfort might be enough to turn away and just say, forget this. I'm not going to that workshop. We just disengage. And again, you can defend yourself here in denial. I'm a good person. I have good intentions. I don't do that. We don't do that here. And critique the person raising the issues as militant, aggressive, they're attacking me. Maybe defending with, that happens to me too. That has nothing to do with race. That has nothing to do with gender. Happens to everybody. You're being just overreactive. I pulled myself by my bootstraps. You can too. In fact, you should. If you all just worked hard, if you were just more professional, then you'd succeed here like I have. Again, success is only individual effort and intelligence, not recognizing all the advantages, privileges we have in our privileged identities, and then blaming folks in marginalized identities if they're not, quote, succeeding. Very common dynamics. In the box of denial, we're just clueless and unaware, and we go along to get along with life as usual, stuck at the individual level, just oblivious to the impact we're having, the impact that others' behaviors are having, the impact of the culture or climate. And you can, again, be denial. You can be in denial from both your privileged and your marginalized identities, all at the same time. Now, there are costs of staying in denial. And we may not recognize them, but recognizing the costs can help us move. How our actions, our behaviors, and then the policies and practices that we are perpetuating and developing are negatively impacting people in marginalized groups that we care about, that we're working with, and that we're supposed to be here to serve. We can become aware of how our actions are undermining effective working relationships, the team, the productivity. If we really value morale, motivation, performance, retention, customer service, if that's what we think is important, helping folks in denial realize that not recognizing microaggressions, not recognizing privilege and the overall climate and culture, the differential impact across identities, that's undermining what you value. And just hearing story after story, whether that's looking at data, can really help people move. And it's because we're not proactively working with others to create greater inclusion. And so we may be frustrated that our working relationships are souring or they're chilly. And if we value relationship, then we may care about why that's happening. Now, in denial, some people don't care about the cost and they just stay stuck there. And they'll be resisting your equity, diversity, inclusion efforts. They may be doing it subtly through sabotage and gossip and behind the scenes and undermining, and they may be doing it overtly. They may be sending anonymous emails to the president and the board, just stirring up stuff. And if your leadership is reactive to those sorts of things, then that will just take your efforts offline because you're so busy dealing with, it's kind of like whack-a-mole. It's like all these different distractions. It's often people that are in denial. Now, you can be thinking about your own life as I highlight each one of these elements and think, when were you in denial and what helped you move? Because many people, I'm assuming you're listening to this, so you have moved, generally. There was a reason you wanted to move. And you have to have a willingness to learn. You have to be willing to own your group memberships, that I am a, and that has some privilege or marginalized. Have to be able to recognize that other people have different group identities and those matter in the daily life experience inside and outside organizations. And you might get willing to move as you understand the daily lived experience of people in marginalized groups. Now, again, you can be in a marginalized group in denial. I remember as a young girl, I bought into the dominant culture and all the narratives about boys were better, men were better, and anything girly, that's the language I use, was less than. And so for, I don't know, at least first decade and a half, if not two, I was just unconsciously supporting sexist dynamics around me and trying to make it on my own as an individual. And, if these young women would just do what I did, then they would be able to succeed like I have. And so I have to really, for me, it was really starting to read about feminist literature, hearing other women my age and more mentors, people I respected and as teachers and professors talking about sexism and getting my attention and seeing some data and learning a little more accurate history. I was in college before I really learned much about anything, quote, women's history. We had one course on it. A visiting professor who was a woman, is the only woman I think I learned from in history my entire 4 years. Just started challenging what I had believed. And there's a lot of dissonance and a lot of pain. And yet, as I started to dive into my own socialization around sexism and gender, and then you can broaden that to other identities, these are the things that can help us move. Lots of reading, watching videos, data about societal as well as organizational differential experiences in our privileged, marginalized identities, beginning to recognize policies and practices that really privilege some and marginalize others. But to really move, I think you really need good coaching, and that can really come from caucus work. And so particularly privileged caucus work, where you're doing a lot of the foundational fundamental learning, and marginalized, where you're doing some of the learning about the dynamics of difference, privileged, marginalized, institutional oppression, and some healing work there. So as we learn more, we realize all that we don't know. We may feel shame, guilt about ourselves. We may feel blame, anger towards others, towards ourselves. And that's when it's most likely you move into the box of judgment for the first time. Because if you're like me, I move in and out of that judgment box in a split second so often. But a little more detail about this box of judgment for the path to competence. Again, you can move into judgment out of your privileged identities as well as your marginalized identities. So as a woman, I remember feeling so angry and judgmental of men once I finally realized that sexism existed, misogyny, patriarchy had been around for millennia. But in the moment, in classes, as well as I remember reading some theories about student development theory and realizing they were done by white men on privileged, classed white men in very elite schools. And I just felt such deep anger. I think it was Carol Gilligan's work was the first time I realized there could be other ways of learning, other ways of knowing. And so she was writing about, but I didn't get that till grad school. So I was in my early 20s by then. So the daily examples of sexist language, sexist behaviors, sexist practices, sexualizing comments, overlooking women's comments, overlooking women for hiring promotions, But when you're in the box of judgment, which I remember being in early, I would just complain about it. I'd be writing papers about it. I'd be talking to my friends about it. I was blaming men. I was blaming society. I was judging myself for how come I didn't realize this sooner. Um, but I wasn't taking effective action. I was swirling and stuck in an unproductive level of emotions. I want to be very clear. These emotions are very healing. Getting in touch with our feelings, expressing them is critically important. But I kept swirling and stuck in. I was almost feeding on them. And then I'd have very ineffective reactions, mostly inaction. And so if you looked at me, I was kind of colluding because I wasn't doing anything. Now, part of it out of our marginalized identity, our inaction could be survival, that it's dangerous to speak up. And the box of judgment, when we're blaming and swirling in judgment, we're just not very effective. Now, in a privileged identity, as a white person, I remember thinking I was doing just fine. I was leading diversity trainings and some workshops with LC White Cross Associates. I got to be on teams where we were doing work on sexism, racism, and heterosexism. And I was doing fine until one day I got very direct and pointed feedback from two mentors and colleagues of color who were leaders in the organization about my very recent, very public racist behaviors. Now, instead of leaning in, which would have meant I was farther along my path, instead of being curious and really listening and owning my behavior and trying to learn more with my white mentors and learning and growing, instead, I leapt into the box of judgment and I felt such shame and such guilt. And I was just berating myself with blame. How could I have done that? I thought I was farther along. I'm such a fraud. I was in such fear that I'd get thrown out and then it would have been my fault. And then I blamed others. Why didn't other mentors and teachers along the way better prepare me? How come I didn't learn this in my doctoral work? How come this consulting firm, people let me get this far without helping me learn and grow? Do you hear, just kind of went to victim, poor me. And then I went to, how come all these people of color are so oversensitive? What I did wasn't that bad. Why are they targeting me? They do all these heterosexist things that I don't call them out. I mean, I just was pulling out everything. And then I blamed society. There's so much racism. I was cheated. I wasn't taught right. My history books taught me racism. It's not my fault that I have these attitudes. So I got so defensive and I was so ineffective. I was just mired in white fragility and I withdrew for several years. I just kept my head down, didn't want to be called out again. But I stuffed all those emotions and I stayed very ineffective. And then what I did next was I started realizing that other whites had really racist behaviors around me in my workshops and in trainings. And so I would aggressively go after them, not doing self as instrument, not relating in, but I would just call them out really aggressively. And I didn't realize at the time, but now I can look back and say that I used them as a mirror and confronted them as a way to avoid and cover up my own feelings of guilt and shame. Because as long as I could focus on calling out other whites and judging them in the box of judgment, I could avoid focusing on myself. I didn't have to look at all that I needed to still learn, but mostly unlearn and relearn and really get honest about my own racist attitudes and behaviors. Instead, I could stay in that box of judgment and I know what it looks like. You all are doing it. I'm the good white. You're not. I was stuck in my own game, shame and guilt. But I didn't talk about that. Because I got kudos from people at times. Because I was calling people out and I was angry about racism, but I wasn't effective. And I wasn't taking any real action to shift, helping others learn, much less to shift dynamics and practices, much less to learn myself. And I never had to do that self-work and develop the skills and competence to be a part of the solution. So to move out of the box of judgment, it's huge. We have to acknowledge our shame, blame, guilt, judgment, anger that we have towards others, towards society, towards ourselves. Find spaces where we can express that in ways that we can be heard and release. Now, I'm not saying not to have some of these emotions, but I see people in our privileged groups just hold on to shame and guilt and go, oh, I'm so bad. And then they stay there swirling and not taking any action. So just digging deep into those roots, have a place of healing. It's usually caucus work. And then choose courage and willingness to be a part of the change. Choose courage to take risks, to know You're not going to get it right the first, second, third, fifth, 12th time. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to mess up. But as you're kind of coming out of judgment, you're like, I'm willing to do this. But a key part of moving out of the box of judgment, whether you step in there for 5 minutes or you're in there for 5 months, or for me, years, is we have to recognize the thoughts that create the feelings of shame, blame, guilt, anger, judgment. And then we have to shift them. And over, we have to shift them. And so if you have ones about yourself, I can't do this, I'm a horrible person, I don't know enough, I'm incompetent, then you change it. Today, I don't know enough, but I can learn and commit to doing better. I can do better. I can be a part of the change. So you shift. I want to be a part of the change. Those bridge thoughts will help you move out of the stuckness into I'm willing to learn more. And our judgments about others, instead of they're so ignorant, they're so offensive, oppressive, they'll never learn, I can't work with them, they should be fired. Shifting our thoughts, we may be able to be useful and supportive and help people learn and grow. And so here are some of mine. They're only repeating what they've been taught, just like I was taught the same things. They're only doing what they've been rewarded to do and never held accountable for. So what can I do to raise their awareness and help them create a culture of accountability so that these dynamics shift? What can I do to motivate them to change? How can I show up effectively? Or if I'm working with folks that are in a lot of pain and a cumulative impact and are reacting out of that anger and pain, directing it towards me or what I'm doing, it's like I can think, oh, I know cumulative impact. I know that level of deep anger and pain. I know what that's like. So what can I do to be useful in this moment, to support them, to hear where they are, just to hold the space? And maybe in the process, there'll be some kind of shift that may be useful. And then we need to take the time and really invest in ourselves, focus on our own self-learning. Take action, keep growing, and keep learning. That's how we move along the path. And to do that, especially in the box of judgment, I think we need to be in caucus work and or with coaches who no more have demonstrated greater capacity, but really be working with other folks in marginalized identities, in your privileged identities, to know you're not alone, and so you can see that some folks are farther ahead and you get support to shift judgment and be willing to move into the box of fear. Doesn't that sound exciting? In the box of fear, if we choose courage to keep moving, we'll have increasing awareness. So now we know more. We're consciously incompetent. We understand the issues. We understand the problems. We might see many more microaggressions. And again, I see this as a continuum. So there's early box of fear and more awareness as we stay in it. We're really hearing the pain and anger of folks in marginalized identities. And if we ourselves look at our own marginalized identities, we're willing to look at our own experiences and how we've been impacted and how we're a member of groups. And so we're just lots more learning, but we feel stuck because we don't know what to do and we're still very ineffective. We often will stay silent, part of the problem. Again, it might be out of survival, and yet there are many folks in marginalized identities that have learned skills and choose courage to speak up. When we do speak up in the box of fear, we're still pretty ineffective, actually almost always ineffective. I remember so vividly being in the box of fear as a white person. I was always walking on eggshells, scared to speak up. And when I'd say things, I would negatively impact others. Sometimes I'd say things that are racist, or as my earlier story was, I would call people out too aggressively, and so whites would shut down and not want to learn and grow. I didn't want to be called out either. I was scared to be called racist and have to look at my own behavior. So I watched, learned more, but I was hesitant to speak up. I just didn't want to make mistakes, fear of making things worse, or to show how incompetent I really was, that you would see my racist attitudes. So I would stay silent and collude in order to maintain this illusion that I was a good white, a good ally. I was often swirling in those fours of Fs, those ineffective stress reactions when we're triggered. So fight, I already described that. Flight, where I'd like, get me out of here. Freeze, I don't know what to do. Freeze is actually so common in the box of fear. We see stuff, we just don't know what to do. And the one that I added, flounder, we try things, but we're ineffective. And we may overtalk or undertalk or say the wrong words or just kind of bumble along. At least we're trying something, but we're not very effective. And we can feel overwhelmed by how much there is to learn, how much there is to undo, how many things we need to change in the organization, how much we have to speak up, but we don't yet have the courage and the consistency to do it effectively. Now, as I became more and more aware of racism, white supremacy, white privilege, whiteness in our cultures, how it's embedded in organizational practices, that I began to speak up a bit more. I kind of found some other whites that I watched and maybe knew would have my back, and so I might speak up and then they'd follow. And so I got closer to the line where I could move maybe into the box of engagement. But here's how you move out of fear. You have to own your fears and all your different feelings and realize you're not alone, that there are a lot of folks trying to learn this, and you together, how do we practice and study? So book clubs here, caucus work is so incredibly important in Box of Fear. And then you got to be willing to take risks and speak out and try. Now that might be in the caucus, you all practice and do role plays. And then when you get in real-time situations, you try something new and then ask for feedback and really listen to it. But don't just wait for other folks to give you feedback. Be watching the impact of your behavior. So you're panning, you're scanning dynamics. When you make a comment, when you say something, and you adjust in the moment, and then you come back with people who say, so this is what I did. Here's what I saw. What do you think was going on? What could I do to keep learning? Continual learning. And keep watch, because it's so easy to slip right back into the box of judgment. I can't do this. It's too hard. I'm not smart enough. It's not worth it. Nobody's teaching me. Nobody's coaching me. This place doesn't value me. See how quickly I can come up with these judgments. I spend a lot of time in the box of judgment in my years. We need to, though, get out of that box of judgment and then watch others, really learn from others, find some mentors. Now, you can get formal mentors or just find people you can learn from. What are the skills you want to learn, and just hang out with them? Maybe it's formal coaching, formal mentoring, or you just go to their workshops or hang out around them when they're having open forums. You might want to use some self-assessments to identify all the skills you need to learn, and just get busy practicing and learning, whether it's videos, workshops, reading. And we have to accept that we're going to make mistakes, and then we have to commit to learn from them. It's not about being perfect. It's about acknowledging them, making amends, changing our behavior, and being willing to go back in. If anybody ever learned a sport, it's all practice. And maybe it's the same if you're ever in a choir, you're learning a new piece of music, it's like, I'm too scared to try it, but you're willing to give it a shot. You got to be willing, curious how to do it. When it's around equity and inclusion, you have to be willing to have humility and acknowledge what you don't know, and then get busy learning. It's going to also involve some deeper work. And again, in caucus work, it's affinity space, accountability spaces, whatever you want to call it, people of similar group identities and the privileged and marginalized identity. So in our dominant identities, our privileged groups, we have to explore internalized dominance. Get honest about how we learned and maybe probably believed that our group was better than the corresponding marginalized identity. We have to get honest about the biases we were taught that were around us, a lot of good socialization work, what biases we still hold on to and choose, and why. So what we get out is still believing we're smarter, better. And then what are the behaviors that are fueled by these biases, our own biases? Get to those roots. Why do we still hold on to them and act out on them? And what do we gain from maintaining the status quo? That level of deep work, it's painful work to realize that I choose to hold on to racist attitudes and choose to have racist behaviors, even though I may not be conscious about it. They're just below the surface. And why do I still do it and haven't done the depth of work that I can really let all that go? That's hard caucus work. And then got to get clear on why we want to change and the need for change, and commit to doing the deeper healing work with others every single day, day in, day out. Now, we all probably have privileged identities as well as marginalized identities. And so similarly, identifying our different marginalized identities and doing the internalized oppression, that's the term, internalized oppression healing work, that is so critical. So many of us in our marginalized identities absorbed so many of those dominant narratives, those oppressive beliefs about negative stereotypes about our own groups. So identifying those and just getting honest with other folk, looking at the costs of believing those, the cost of still holding on to those. It can be very painful, but so healing and so liberating to acknowledge the ways we have colluded out of survival, but the ways we've kept ourselves in survival and not thriving by not engaging in what we need to do to partner to create greater equity inclusion throughout the organization. And so we have to do the healing work to shift these internalized oppressive beliefs, gain a sense of empowerment to look at our behaviors, shift those, and it's going to take a lot of support from other folk in your marginalized group. Maybe you'll get lucky to have one or two people in the corresponding privilege group that can also be a mentor and colleague to help you see what's possible when you're empowered and speak truth to power, and you can move out of this box of fear. So in the box of engagement, we see so much more, we understand so much more, and we're increasingly effective. We take action, and most of the time, we are pretty good. But we have to consciously still think about it each and every moment. Everything we're doing, we have to concentrate and focus. So we notice, we engage in productive behaviors, uninclusive practices, we interrupt microaggressions, educate others, analyze policies, services with an inclusion lens. We create inclusive practices from the start, and we're open and willing to continually revise, shift, practice policies as needs emerge, shift our behaviors as different needs emerge. But we need to intentionally think about what we're doing and think through and plan what we're doing. And so reminders might be helpful. Having a meeting checklist of the questions that we need to ask to analyze every policy or practice with an inclusion lens. Using the group identity cards that I have to make sure we're keeping all issues on our screen as we're making decisions, as we're planning services. Some people keep a list of tools on what are some good ways to initially respond when there's a microaggression. That could be the pairs work. Pan, ask, interrupt, relate, and share. So having it in your folder, you review it right before meeting or have it open. So if you know something, if you know it's going to be one of those meetings, you just have a little something in front of you to remind you, A, to speak up, and B, to look down, see a skill, and then use it. You may pause for a moment, concentrate to remember the steps, what tactics are useful, to de-escalate your own emotions and think through, okay, what do I do to do that? Now, what do I do next? You may want to rehearse it in your mind before you speak up. These are all indicators that we're in engagement. Increasingly effective, usually pretty useful, but we have to think about it. So over the years, I was developing more skills and capacity as a white person to engage other whites, respond productively in mixed race groups, but I still had to consciously think about what I was doing. I had to keep an intentional focus on the dynamics of race and racism, or I'd let them get off my screen. But over time, I continued to broaden my skill sets, and I got more confidence and competence to interrupt racist dynamics and educate other whites. Because as we move deeper into the box of engagement, we really want to expand our toolkit and really learn how to pan dynamics in the moment, speak up without judgment or interpretation, just name what we see, to navigate our own emotions to a way that we can be heard, but we're not projecting our emotions or triggers onto others. To be able to ask questions, engage, explore, dialogue, to facilitate people learning. Have the skills to interrupt dynamics, the ones that support oppression, and then interrupt in a way that really adds the support to people impacted by the microaggressions or the policies, and interrupt in ways that furthers learning, and just people don't just shut down. Part of that is being able to relate in before we interrupt, noticing comments that cross a line, but remembering when we've done something similar, that's what we're doing in the box of engagement. We're engaging in like, you probably didn't know what you just did. So a face-saving strategy to start with. Or you probably already do this, but in that moment, you may not have noticed. It's something that I see all the time, and I did it last week. And so you're relating in from this energy of, I've done it before, I could do it tomorrow. So not that gotcha energy, but let's have an engaged conversation that furthers understanding, builds our relationship. So you want to keep learning together in the future. It interrupts things, but it builds an accountability structure because you're building relationship to continue learning then and in the future. And then you can use S of pairs, that's sharing. And you're expanding your toolkit to learn how to use yourself as instrument, your own stories, your own feelings, the impact in the moment of what you're experiencing, and to share that in the way that's connecting, not out of the box of judgment or social justice arrogance. So you're not confronting out of the box of like, you did it wrong, I'm better. You shouldn't think that. How could you? I'm so disappointed. I have thought, felt, and said all those things. Social justice arrogance, we think we're better than, we show up as, think we're better than, and just perpetuates these same dynamics. Ineffective oppression keeps going. We slide into the box of judgment, out of engagement, right into judgment as soon as we start judging others as not being skilled enough, smart enough, not knowing enough. We have to shift our thinking to they're doing the best they could with what they had, what they knew. I remember I'm not very effective, and I'm still not all the time. And so how can I relate in out of compassion, empathy, support them in their learning, let them know that, you know, I've done that, I've said that, I could do it next week, and I want you to help me see what I'm doing that's not effective in the future. So how do we educate, support others as colleagues alongside, not above, not dragging them along, not critiquing them in judgment, but understanding, compassion, and clear accountability and change? That's what we need to be learning the box of engagement. So to move further into engagement and to be ready to move in the box of competence, where we can show up effective without having to concentrate, without planning, without a worksheet, without a cheat sheet, we have to keep practicing and always seeking and asking for feedback and using it. We have to stay present to be able to hear and appreciate what folks are telling us verbally and or in their behaviors. We have to be continually panning and scanning the environment. We have to explore the impact of our behaviors in the moment. I could be wrong, but it seemed I had an impact on you. Do you want to talk about that? We're trying skills to have authentic, honest, vulnerable dialogue, real time, in the moment. It's not just about teaching and telling. It's about building competency through engagement. And then we need to keep learning all of those complexities, those nuances, new concepts, new information, language, which is no longer supported as much by folks in marginal identity. Language keeps learning, concepts keep learning, particularly identities that, at least it seems to me, are getting finally more and more attention, like disability justice, immigration status, gender identity. So even Islamophobia, I see more and more folks realizing we need to learn more and more. Now, it doesn't mean that people know all about sexism and sex assigned at birth, because with the Me Too movement, there's been just this resurgence around what we need to learn to be able to understand and do, around consent and in all the intersections of identity. And then racism, there's just more and more dynamics that are coming to the surface that many people, particularly folk of color, knew before, but whites, we seem to just keep learning new and new nuances and complexities, and especially at all the intersections. So we have to keep choosing courage to learn and to put ourselves out there and admit we don't know. And then choose courage to speak up over and over and over again. Push ourselves a little farther, a little quicker, places we haven't gone before in the box of engagement, so that we're just continuing to learn. And then we have to align our intentions and our behaviors. So before we speak, we go inside, we're thinking about what we want to do, but we go inside and it's, what am I intending? What will help the learning? And is that what I'm coming out of? Caucus work can be some of the best places to be practicing and doing role plays with different strategies, different contexts, just increasing the difficulty, the nuances all the time. And a place to keep getting honest and more vulnerable, to dig into our roots and our biases, our unproductive behaviors, and practice more effective ways to think, act, and especially in the moment when we misstep, how can we respond effectively? It's critical in the box of engagement. If we want to move, we have to be using our mentors, our coaches, that can be peer coaches, but to actively learning from them and sharing what we know back. And then I believe to truly get these tools and skills and ways of being in us, we have to choose courage to teach, train, coach others. I believe we learn best what we teach, And so developing workshops, developing coaching protocols, and finding other folks in marginalized identities of yours and the privileged identities of yours, see if they'll come together. You be the organizers of those caucuses and the workshops. Because once we've developed this level of competence, even though we're still having to think about it, we have a responsibility, in my opinion, to show up and help others along their path. So we just keep multiplying more and more. When people are operating out of the final element of path to competence, the box of competence, we're responding out of unconscious competence. I have moments in this space when I'm in the flow. I'm responding effectively without much planning or thought. When people are in the box of competence, we're consistently responding in useful ways, panning unconsciously, noticing dynamics, engaging effectively time and again. And we engage in ways that leave people feeling whole and motivated to keep learning and growing. We just do it over and over without forethought, planning, without that deliberate concentration. It just happens. I think I get moments in the box of competence when I'm facilitating white caucuses. That's where I feel so often in the flow. And I'm relating in and engaging other whites, and I'm kind of laughing with them when someone says something that I'm like, yeah, and what's the root of that? And we just are supporting each other, getting honest and vulnerable together. Yes, I'm leading and facilitating, but I'm so present. It's like I'm in this dance and we aren't thinking about it. We just are doing this wonderful dance together. Now, I'm not saying every white caucus I experience that, but that's when I'm mostly in competence, or when I'm facilitating good foundational equity inclusion workshops. Done it so many times. There's not much I haven't seen before. And so when there's resistance or an inappropriate comment or microaggression in the moment, I just unconsciously move into engaging and say, tell me more, or I just have the tools. I've done it so often that so long as I'm present, I take care of my own self-care and community care, and I show up with good intentions, positive, productive intentions, then I'm usually in the flow in those workshops. It's a habit at that point. We have automatic response. It's a skill we use without thinking. Now, it can seem really easy to others. Folks can watch people in competence and they're like, wow, I can do that, but they don't yet know how much work it took. There's the daily attention, the practice, the mistakes, the learning, the pain. All it takes to really be consistently effective and in competence so much over time that you're doing it unconsciously. Now, let me be clear. It is not about perfection at all. And so to keep learning in this box of competence, you have to realize that you will still say and do things that will have a negative impact on others. And so instead of sliding in the box of judgment of blame, game, guilt, critique, instead you move into an apology. I hear what you're saying. I apologize for my misstep. I'm open to exploring the impact if you want to say more, and then really listen and affirm what people are saying to you about the impact they had out of your behavior. And then commit publicly and with them to learning more, doing better in the future, and then do it. So it's not about perfection. This is about sidestepping the box of judgment and always be committed to lifelong learning. Because just today, I respond pretty effectively in unconscious competence doesn't mean tomorrow I will. The issues are shifting. I may not be as present tomorrow, and there's always more to learn. And so committing to learning these complex skills, capacities, pushing yourself farther than you've gone before, be in new situations, because we're never fully competent. We're always in development. And so please don't let the terminology of competence get in your way. Some people might be calling it cultural fluency, cultural proficiency. Language may shift, but the concept here is we're always learning. We are committed to staying in lifelong learning, always developing, and embracing our own learning journey with humility, willingness, and excitement. Like, what else am I supposed to be learning so I can be even more useful and effective tomorrow? And we use the path to stay in alignment with our passions, our values, our life purpose. That everything we say, everything we do is in alignment with what we believe the world is we're wanting to create. The Path to Competence has been such a powerful map to guide my journey. I am so grateful for Doctors Jack Gant and Delight Frost for their wisdom, their willingness to share the model. It's been especially useful when I find myself regressing at times, when I realize that I'm in the box of judgment and shaming myself or blaming others, or I'm in the box of fear and I'm walking on eggshells and reacting less effectively again. Then if I just pause and go inside and remember the model, then I'll know what to do to keep moving, be more effective in the moment, keep growing. I just want to share some final thoughts about this model. Again, you can have an overall element in your life. You can generally be in fear or generally be stuck in judgment or generally in early engagement. But again, you can be in many different boxes and all these different categories all at the same time. So today, I believe I'm generally in the box of engagement around race in general. But if we're talking about Native Americans, indigenous folk, especially if I'm in a country other than the US, I'm probably slipping back in a box of fear because I'm just not so effective. I don't feel I know enough. I'm not as confident. Sex assigned to birth, at sexism, misogyny, I'm usually in box of engagement. And yet, lately, there have been one or two men in rooms that were so in resistance and box of denial. I found myself tripping over what I wanted to say because I just had not dealt with men in such sexist behavior in a long time. Box of gender identity, I could have done a whole workshop about how I was in denial, clearly in the box of judgment for so long. Lots of box of fear of just not knowing what to do. I think today I have a foot in fear and a foot of early engagement. There are some days that I can engage pretty effectively, but I have to think about it. But I still question, do I know enough as someone who's cisgender? Do I do it effectively? And class, economic class, I'm often in the box of fear. I have so much class privilege. I have not done the depth of learning and healing work and unpacking work as I have around whiteness. And so I name it and speak it, but I don't always hear the microaggressions and don't always know how to effectively respond. And then in this current day and age, I want to challenge us all on all these issues, but particularly immigration status. I'm willing to speak up when I notice something, but how much am I missing? And again, if there's someone who is so egregious in their hatred and their negative xenophobic racist comments, I hear about it happening, but I've never been in a workshop or in front of someone on the street that has come out of that place. So I hope I would know what to do, but I've never been tested. So I'm probably in the box of fear. So as you notice, as I'm trying to get a little more honest and vulnerable about where I am on different days or in general, diagnose yourself. In general, where are you? And then on all the different categories of difference, you're privileged and marginalized, where are you? And that can help you set a learning plan for yourself. And you can be in different places, different boxes, and different sets of skills. For instance, around microaggressions, you could be like, I'm in engagement, maybe early competence. Something happens, pretty much I can respond. But how about analyzing policies and practices, especially when we're developing them? Can you recognize the bias or how a policy is being set up to privilege folks and create barriers for others? Can you do that in the moment quickly? Can you speak up if it's your supervisor or your vice president that's the one that thinks it's a really good idea? You might be in the box of fear in that context. And then another skill set. You're in a caucus, a meeting, a workshop, and people in marginalized identities are expressing deep pain, deep anger. Are you able to facilitate effectively? Depending on your group, privilege or marginalized, your positionality. You're with folks in privileged identity that are expressing deep shame, guilt, fear, and judgment of themselves and judgment of others in their privileged group. Can you facilitate in that type of deep feeling? Conflict. People are deeply triggered in conflict with each other, and there's so many variations of that. So you can be in the different boxes, different categories of difference, and different skill sets. It's also not inevitable that we keep growing. As I mentioned so many times, we can choose to stay stuck and be stuck and like, I'm not moving for years, decades of life. And you can be effective one moment and then regress into the box of fear or judgment in the next in the blink of an eye. And there's always more to learn, always more to learn. What I love about this model is I can know where an individual is, or an entire team, a group in a workshop, a whole organization. That'll help me design workshops, decide how I want to engage in feedback, how I want to respond to a comment, how I want to design a workshop or an activity in a team meeting. And it can help me be strategic to think about feedback. If they're in this box, how might they receive feedback? Therefore, how can I enter and share it with all my different skills? And how can I do all of these organizational change practices that further learning and behavior change, that help more people along on their path to competence? And finally, when I feel triggered, or you feel triggered, using the path to competence to diagnose where you are can help you find your way out. And I can be more clear and centered, identify what I need to do to be effective in the moment, and then over time, what I need to do to heal whatever it is that is still fueling my triggered reactions, so I might get further along my path. It took me many, many, many times hearing my mentors teach path in workshops, studying the outline so that then I practiced teaching it in workshops before I was able to embody it and be able to teach it. And then I didn't teach it for years. And so preparing in the last couple of years as I've been sharing it more, and especially for this video, I've really had to dig deep and learn it to a much deeper level so that today it's really in me, and I embody it, and I can use it in my work, usually as one of my major lenses today. I hope you continue to study the path to competence. Re-listen to this video, look at the handouts, Google online and learn how other people talk about this learning model, and then remember how Jack and Delight have put on equity inclusion on top of it, to continue to deepen your capacity to meet people where they are, support them on their learning journey, to move them along so they get greater competence day after day and move along their path to competence. I'll see you in the next video.